All right, thanks for joining everybody for the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development's Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee. Let's see, what do I need to do here? I would like to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to read the statement for doing the meeting remotely. The Equitable Housing Strategy Subcommittee meeting has now commenced. It is December 17th at 1:05 p.m. The meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. And with that, we'll do the roll call. Lori Meservo.
Present.
Kenny Wong.
Present as well.
Jay Young, I am here. And then Ray Winch and Vicky Cusino are absent. So we have 3 out of 5 constituting a quorum. So we will move forward with our agenda. I don't think that there is anybody from the city's Office of Equity for an update. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. No one from Equities here.
Okay. Number 4, HCD update. Neto or Rachel, do y'all have any updates? If not, that is fine, but want to give you all a chance.
Sure. We have a couple updates. Some might be similar to the last Commission on Equitable Housing, the main commission meeting, but the point in time count, we're still doing a call for volunteers. The point in time count will be Wednesday, January 29th from 6 to 11 a.m. Yeah, so we're still looking for volunteers. I could put the link in the chat if folks are interested. And then some other updates. Milagro on Oracle is now open for lease up. So we put out a press release yesterday. I can also put that in the chat. So it is now open for applicants. And we will be doing a housewarming celebration for Milagro on Oracle at the beginning of the year. Commissioners should have received an RSVP, or if not, you will soon. And I think I had one more update that is escaping me. Neto, did you have anything? But yeah, I think that's updates for HCD. Thank you.
That's it for right now.
If something else occurs to you, obviously you can just let us know and jump back in. Thank you for the update. Moving on to number 5, our work plan. And I just kind of recycled the agenda that we had used last time. I knew that a couple of folks weren't going to be here. So we might end up having a short meeting today, but I do think it's worth touching base about what we're going to do going forward as a committee. And then obviously action items after that. So, I think we've been relatively busy this past year. And one of the things I don't think we ever really got to do is we never really, as a group, went over the readings that we had this summer. We could do that. I think maybe at this point, though, maybe just if there's anything from those readings that we want to bring forward to the group, we can do that. Also, just to let you all know, we will be working with the facilitators at our next full commission meeting. And one of the things that I'm going to talk to them about today is, how we move forward as a commission, and obviously what role the facilitators are going to play. And what I would really like to do is I would like for us to have more time at our commission meetings to have deliberation. I think we've talked about that a decent amount, so that we can, talk amongst ourselves and process a lot of the information that we're receiving. And I think the other thing that I would like to do, and hopefully this will go over well with everyone on the commission, but I'm hoping that the facilitators can help us narrow down or focus in on like a handful of issues that we think are critical for the commission to address. And I think through some sort of deliberative process that they can help us with. And then what I'm going to suggest as well is that the committees, in addition to whatever work they want to take on, which is kind of how we've been doing it, is actually to assign some of the or assign all of the different topics that we land on to the different subcommittees, so that the subcommittees actually have something to work on that the commission has assigned, and we can kind of create a loop where each subcommittee is dealing with, talking about, investigating the issues that the full commission has settled on. And what I'm hoping is that at some point during the year, maybe it'll be towards the end of the year, we can have a solid set of recommendations around housing equity issues. So I don't know what that sounds like to y'all. I know that we have talked about, struggling at times with kind of like what direction to take as a subcommittee. So I'm hoping that maybe that will help all of our subcommittees with a little bit more direction, and really a little bit more action as well. So that's why I'm bringing that up now, is under the work plan, because obviously that has a lot to do with our work plan. So anyway, Kenny and Lori, what are you guys' thoughts about that? Does that sound good? Any kind of, any issues with that? I'd love to get y'all's feedback.
I definitely like the idea of asking the facilitators to help us get a little bit more focused, and then maybe doing some more of the work in the subcommittees, because it sometimes feels like the larger group it's hard to stay on track and keep to our schedule, because there's just, there's so much rich conversation going on. And I want to reiterate that, it's been almost a year since our retreat, and we asked for less presentations, and I think we got more in this last year. So I really appreciate the time for conversations about some of these issues that the commission is passionate about. I mean, I think definitely lending enough time to this proposed sales tax is a really big deal. And I hope that we do that so that we don't feel rushed, because sometimes I think I feel rushed and I end up voting without feeling like we've had enough time to really flesh things out, because there's so many presentations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the tensions with the commission as well is that, there are outside interests. I mean, that's not really the right way to put it, but that's what's coming to my mind. But like, there are entities and people that are bringing stuff to the commission and asking to get on the agenda, and then they're on the agenda and it's kind of like, well, what do we do with it? And so, I mean, I think that's okay to a certain extent, but to your point, Lori, it's like it ends up being a lot of presentations without a lot of deliberation and then decision making. So yeah, that's definitely kind of what I was thinking. And also, yeah, bringing up the retreat as well, it's like we put in a lot of time and effort to kind of lay out what we were wanting to do as a group, and basically a year has passed and we haven't really acted on that. So again, hopefully the facilitators will help to do that. But I think the idea is that I think it's important for us to control our time a little bit more, and it's like we only have so much time. So, maybe even if we only narrow it down to like 3 issues or something like that, we can't, I just don't think we can take on everything that comes our way. So appreciate that feedback. What about you, Kenny? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like those ideas, again, just having a little more time to figure out where where we as a body, with the full commission want to, be lending our support or time, kind of having a voice together. That feels very important. So appreciate all the work to get facilitation done. And I'd say too, maybe this is part of what you had mentioned, being able to work through some of the more specific issues that we're tackling as a subcommittee with facilitation too. I could see that being very productive as well. Like from this subcommittee, what are the, 2 or 3 top things? What do we think is important to leverage with a full commission? And then the same, for the other subcommittees as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just thinking now, I mean, I wish Ray and Vicky were here as well, but I think it's worth us thinking about, what have we talked about recently? I mean, as a full commission, we've talked about evictions. I think, that really struck a chord with folks. And then, obviously we had Bill Mackey come and present about the zoning situation to our subcommittee and then to the full commission. So, those are 2 things I think that people seemed really interested in. And then obviously, Lori, you mentioned the sales tax, which is really important as well. Are there other things that y'all can think about or think of that we've talked about as a subcommittee, either that we've talked about as a subcommittee that would be worth kind of putting on the agenda of things that we want the full commission to tackle? Or are there other things that have been kind of floating out there that maybe we haven't given any attention that we think would be worth giving attention to, and again, maybe elevating to the full commission as one of the handful of things that we focus on? Go ahead, Lori.
I was thinking about how we spent a lot of time talking about an equity study. And that hasn't really gone anywhere. I want to say that there are several of the presentations that I found really helpful, but I think what I was feeling with the last one, like I found the zoning one really interesting because I didn't know any of that. That's not really my wheelhouse. But then, we keep having these rich presentations and it seems so bleak. And there's just like, there's no solutions being brought forth. And then we have the presentation about the sales tax, and here's an opportunity to really make a big impact, right? And then I think, much to several people's dismay on the commission, like there wasn't as much put to housing, maybe as folks would have hoped. And, so it's like, we keep getting these presentations, housing's not affordable, zoning is terrible, we don't have enough, we don't have enough affordable units, we don't have enough shelter. And I just feel like we're stuck in this loop of, it's really grim. And sometimes I leave that meeting and I'm like, what am I doing here?
Right.
So I know that that's a little bit more of what I said earlier, but I think if we can bring action items, and I think to that point, an equity study would be an action item, and then get it done, and then use the information to actually make some discernible change.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, the other piece of that equity study, which we've talked about a million times, is measuring equity, right? Like, how are we measuring equity over time in the housing space? So yeah, that makes sense. And it is true, like a lot of the stuff is bleak, and it's like, how do we carve out a little bit of a niche where we feel like we're making a difference? I think that's the real challenge here. So yeah.
I mean, after 4 years, I need to feel like I'm making a difference, because I don't want to just show up and hear about how bad things are. I already know that.
Right.
So what can we do? What can, even one little small thing, what can we do to make a difference as a commission?
Yeah, it's such a great point. Such a great point. Yeah, go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, I thought I might piggyback on a couple of those things. And connecting with some points from the last commission and some of the things that we're talking in the subcommittee. You had a great presentation with Xiao Chen at the Pima Community Land Trust event, and just really struck by the, what you were saying there. It hasn't been this forceful kind of counter movement in terms of equity in housing, specifically racial equity and desegregation. And that kind of echoes for me when I'm thinking about the commission as well. Is there a way to shape and kind of coalesce that story around our investments in housing and the work that is being done? I echo some of what Lori was saying about the presentations. It feels like there's somewhat of a disconnect between, like, okay, why wouldn't we include more for evictions prevention, just having those two back to back, right? And as we deliberate that as a commission, how great would that be if we could create a holistic kind of vision or view that builds support for more funding for housing, that shows how this funding could be really, impactful, transformative, whatever words, we might want to do. But, it gives us some hope, right? That there is this mechanism in motion. But I think that we can do a much stronger job of, helping to tell that story, if we decide to support that, or, whatever the deliberation ends up being, in conversation with, the city manager's office and such. And that was one of the takeaways I had from last summer's reading too, that I think at the after the projects chapters, I thought it was really striking that there's gonna be deliberation and contestation, let's say, but that all produces a really robust kind of civil society, to use an older term, constellation of actors that actually, I think the book shows, like, Tucson did pretty well in this kind of transition that a lot of cities were facing around the country. And that was, very hopeful for me. Kind of gave some wind on our backs for the commission and the work that we're doing over the summer. So yeah, that's sort of what I'd like to see. What's the big threads or narratives here in Tucson that are going to resonate with our community, and how could we explore that, maybe with some facilitation or some just conversations among the group. But yeah, that's trying to pull together a few different ideas from what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I have heard you say a few times, Kenny, in our various meetings, like, thinking about how we're shaping the message. And I think that's part of what I'm hearing from you again. And I think it's such a good point. And something that has occurred to me in terms of, like, kind of what we're learning about, and then also the message, like you're talking about, Kenny, is with the what's it called, the corridor planning tool that's, like, about to, or that's kind of working its way through the process. I'm on the planning commission, and we're going to have a hearing about that tomorrow evening, actually. But one of the things that I have been kind of picking up on is that the usual suspects, basically neighborhoods in kind of the middle of Tucson, I think are really starting to push back against the tool for all of the reasons that people always don't want density or change. And I just think that we have a real disconnect, and maybe it's part of the messaging, just in terms of, like, I think Tucsonans like to see themselves as, caring about their neighbors, and a place where, human rights are respected, et cetera, et cetera. But then where the rubber meets the road, it's not actually how it plays out. I just feel like, with this corridor planning tool, I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but we've got to make some of these changes in order to, have more density, have more housing. And one of the things that I think is kind of coming out is people are like, well, with this tool, nobody has to build any affordable housing, so why are we even talking about that? And it's like, well, again, that may be true, but just increasing the housing stock, as we've learned, does mitigate prices. And even in some places, I think like Austin, where there's been lots of building, prices have actually come down. So, you know, they're not actually building affordable housing per se, but, you know, it is bringing the cost of housing down. So, you know, this kind of resistance, I think, from, you know, interest in Tucson is a real challenge for, you know, folks that really don't have a voice at the table, who are in need of affordable housing, or who are renters, you know, trying to challenge the status quo, of folks who, you know, when change comes around, even if it's going to be better for the city as a whole, are still very resistant to it. So I think that's a big concern. And, you know, again, it's just like, and I think hopefully this is where the facilitators will help, is like, of all the things we're talking about, like, how can we focus in on a couple of these things? And then, like, to your point, Lori, feeling like, you know, looking back at 2025, being like, you know, it was hard, there was a lot of stuff, but like, we were able to take some action to move the ball forward, or to plant a flag or something like that. I think is really important. So this is great feedback. Is there anything else that y'all can think about, like other issues that we might want to bring forward, as like, you know, if and when we do the facilitation, trying to land on some issues to deal with as a full commission? Is there anything else that we have talked about, or that or is on y'all's mind?
I guess related to the facilitation stuff too, you know, I guess I'd be interested in the commission, and to what you were sharing as well, like, what are the community kind of trends that we see that are really important for how our city and community is thinking about housing, right? I know we've gone through such, you know, whiplash even since the pandemic, you know, since I've been here, and people even before that, right? It's in people's lived experience and memory of what this town has been, and you know how that shapes where they want to see things go, and support, or you know, opposition to different things. And I think we you know, need to be clear-eyed about what those trends are, and again, find the right messaging and ways to make those links between, you know, action and inaction, in what is, you know, it's kind of a complicated message, right, of how housing affordability happens. So, you know, it's not as quick and pithy as, you know, yeah, you just make it affordable, right? So there's some stuff to work out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point for sure. Yeah, community trends, yeah, about how people are thinking about housing. And, you know, again, just back to that point as well, just the disconnect of like people saying, oh, we know housing affordability is an issue, we need more affordable housing. And then, I mean, it's really, I guess, the classic not in my backyard, right? It's like, well, somewhere else. I mean, you know, I also think, this is just my personal opinion, but I just think that we also are living in this space where we have been so co-opted by thinking that the market is the only thing that's going to get us out of this. And if we just tweak zoning, or we, you know, look at the kind of mechanisms that through which housing are built in Tucson, you know, as if we do that, reduce impact fees and reduce the cost and the, you know, the time to get permits through and stuff, like, the market will magically come through, build enough housing, and all of a sudden housing will be affordable. And I just think that that is not accurate. And I think that, you know, ultimately we actually really need to reassess how we do public housing in this nation, whether it's social housing or, but like, the government essentially needs to build housing that's competing with the private market. And, you know, nobody's really willing to say that, much less take any action on it. But I just, you know, even before this housing crisis, supposed housing crisis that we're in, poor people still had a hard time affording housing. I mean, it's not like that has changed dramatically for low income folks in this community. I mean, was it more affordable? Yeah, sure, but it's always been a struggle for people. So, you know, just again, building more housing kind of through the market, is just, I don't think, ever really going to address the issue. So, I think, also thinking about kind of like, what do we want to stick within the realm of possibility, right? Or do we want to, as a commission, bring more expansive ideas to the table about, what would actually create affordable housing? I guess I'm inclined to think more on practical terms just because, of the time and limited capacity that we have. But I do think it's interesting, like we essentially operate in a very, very market oriented box, and we're talking about essentially market-based solutions and unencumbering the market to produce more housing. So I do think it's something that we should think about as a group, though, because I do think that really can limit our thinking about how to do housing. So.
I like that, Jay. I don't know how long it's been, but there's been plenty of studies that show there isn't a single city in America in which a minimum wage person can afford their rent. And it's been like that for years.
Yeah.
Through better economy, through worse economy. And part of that is the federal minimum wage is what, 7 something. And while we're better off in Arizona, people still can't afford an apartment on, I think we're at going up to 16 or something like that, which used to be considered like a decent wage, right? And very quickly it became not such a decent wage. $15 an hour is no longer a livable wage, and that was just passed, right? So we're not keeping up.
Right.
And it's been years since, rent was actually considered what was affordable for folks who were lower income. So I think to your point, that's definitely something we could focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation, and you're absolutely right about the affordability. There is going to be a gap that needs to be addressed, and it's relative that disparity is only increased of what's possible, and I think that contributes quite directly to a lot of the pressure people feel and the outcomes that we see within the city. So I'd love to have that. I both need that vision for myself, as like, okay, this is where our values are and this is where we're headed. Because I do think it helps focus what the practical looks like, right? And the steps that we take to get to, more of that vision. So for me, it's both and I think, if we can shape a message, get people on board, show where support is needed, maybe that can be we're advisor anyway, but it could be some sort of, leadership and some guidance from, the commission as a whole.
Something I think is also interesting about our commission is that, it's the Commission for Equitable Housing and Development, right? And the only developer, I guess, I would say is Jim, and he's an affordable housing developer. I know Mary Ann is, in the development space to a certain extent as well, but like, the real power structure in terms of housing and what gets built is nowhere near our table, which I think is interesting, right? There's nobody from the Southern Arizona Home Builders or the Tucson Association of Realtors or, the groups that actually really control, I think, what's going on and what gets built and, how all of that plays out. So I also wonder if we're, by not having a more diverse group at the table, if we're really just all of this is really just kind of window dressing because we don't really hold any power. So I don't know if that's something that we could address, or even if we want to address. It would, I think, change the tenor of the commission to a certain extent, but again, that is the reality. So if we're not able to have some conversations with folks who would probably say never again another public housing unit should be built. Is it really realistic, and are we getting the full picture of what it really means to build housing and to build stuff that people can afford? I guess what I'm also thinking at this point is, obviously, we did have the presentation about the sales tax initiative. And I don't know, I guess my impression was that that was a relatively cool reception for the presentation from the commission. What were y'all's thoughts about, I guess not so much the presentation. I thought the presentation was good, but like, what about the sales tax initiative? What are y'all's thoughts? And, you know, as we do deliberate about this more, both in our subcommittee and then at the full commission, what were you guys' thoughts about that?
So I had a couple thoughts. I know lots of folks right now are struggling with the ending of some ARPA funds and COVID money. And I wasn't clear if some of the projects that the city of Tucson has right now that I know were funded with those COVID funds are ending. And so what does that mean, number one? And number two, I'm trying to think of the appropriate way to say this. We've spent years and years and years talking about how grim the housing situation is, and then we're brought a budget that has more money in policing than housing. And I don't want to be the person that like doesn't recognize that it's still great that there's money put in the housing budget, but it's really, it was a drop in the bucket. And it isn't surprising to me once we saw those numbers, that folks weren't thrilled about that. And then the other thing I looked at was like, wow, this sales tax is trying to tackle many, many issues. So it's catering to everyone, right? Which seems like a way to get votes, right? Because there were so many issues that like just about any person who votes is going to say, oh, that one's important to me. I'm glad to see that in there, which I think maybe waters down impact to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that was stepping outside of what should be said, but I'm all for, I understand like how tight government budgets are and the outgoing governor really proposed some challenges to our municipalities with that flat tax and they have to make it up. And I get that. And I understand taxes are a way of life and I'm happy to support those as someone who lives in this community. But for issues that are important to me. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Kenny, what do you think? What do you think?
Oh yeah, I think I kind of was poking a little bit at the full commission meeting, and I think I agree. Just I wonder if it's too much of a compromise. Especially if I would love to see more funding for housing, support for programs that we know are impactful, and investments that are visible, that will make a difference in how people literally experience and see this money that they are generating, right? Through sales taxes, roll out in the community. And so I was also concerned about, I would love for people to see the bus shelters, like really great and support the bus system as a first encounter of where's my sales tax money going, and not like a police plane. I thought that was it felt like, whoa, this is like really spanning to so many areas, and just thinking about what are people going to see from what their money's going to. So that contrast for me was really stark. I get folks that, like the personnel for public safety, I think that's a visible kind of engagement of where funds are being used that I'm more comfortable with, because that's a person, right? That's somebody in your community that maybe coming as an EMS to something that you need. And that's more comfortable to me than, kind of these more negative kind of investments. Negative in the sense that like, I don't want that to be my first engagement with what this money is going towards. So um, I was, reflecting a little bit, and I wonder if something concrete, I don't know if this is possible, was if it sounded like they're just starting to do more of the robust public engagement from what we heard. If it's if that public engagement can actually be used to modify the percentages that will essentially get locked in with the ballot initiative, if we could revisit that and see what the possibility is, to incorporate that response, that feedback that they'll be getting. Because I think proportionally, it's I don't know, that I think that feels important, that flexibility is not just within the categories. And if it's not, that those are set very intentionally at the outset. Because if there's so much money for, these technology investments, well, what if that's not needed in the future, right? Why not, that proportion? I think housing is going to be a continuing need. So I don't know. Yeah. I'd love for that to be incorporated after the public engagement.
Yeah, it's interesting though, Kenny, because what I took away from the presentation was that the percentages were set. And it seemed like there was at one point like a window for some of it to be adjusted, but so I was a little bit confused about that. And it also sounded like, again, if I recall correctly, this might not be accurate, but it seemed like wasn't Lane kind of touting the public engagement that had already taken place? Was that not part of the presentation, or am I just misremembering that?
I think that's right. The percentages of the categories, but if essentially things are hinging on those categories, I think some of those the investments could be categorized as different things, right? I get personnel is very different from like capital stuff.
Yeah.
But I think a fair amount of what's divided in the categories, a lot of it is towards like, public safety purposes. And
Yeah.
so that's what makes those, I guess I'd be curious to explore if, recategorization prior to the initiative is possible. And in a way that incorporates what further engagement is. It sounded like the public engagement that was considered had been from a lot of different engagements, not specifically about the ballot initiative. And so I think that influence what we're talking about at hand, that influences how people are going to respond, what they will ask or be comfortable with, right?
Mhm.
So, I think there's a lot of engagement around Plan Tucson, the different efforts. But that's really different from talking specifically about this tax initiative.
Yeah, for sure. I have mixed feelings about the sales tax initiative. I mean, first of all, just fundamentally, I really do not like continually funding government services by sales tax. I mean, obviously it's regressive. And the idea again, where, I think the way Tucson sees itself versus the reality it really shows up here, as opposed to, voting to tax ourselves in other ways. We continually go back to a sales tax because that's what will pass. And again, I understand the practicalities, but I just, what's the sales tax going to get to? 15 cents? I mean, it's just like there's so much that needs to be funded. And obviously it's complicated, and the state shared revenue and all of that stuff makes it really challenging to fund government these days. People want a lot of services and benefits for not much money. So that's a real political challenge that I'm glad I'm not having to deal with as a political person these days. But I do think, the other side of the coin about the policing aspect of it, the public safety aspect, is I do, from what I have seen, Tucson is actually under policed in a lot of ways. I mean, compared to other areas, Tucson doesn't have the same kind of level of policing. I know that Tucson has gotten a reputation for really slow response times and for things that people would expect, like non-emergency stuff as well. For people expect, my house got broken into, you call the police and they show up in an hour or so, and it's like, that's not what's happening because, there's not enough personnel. So I do have some sympathy for that, because I do, at the end of the day, often think that, we do need public safety. And I think this is also a place where people get confused or are don't have accurate facts in terms of like what most people really want. And it's like, yes, there are the negative impacts of policing, but if you ask people, and people impacted by, I would say, the negative aspects of policing, there is still strong support for more policing. So, I think public opinion about policing is a little bit challenging to gauge. So I think, which kind of leads me to, I just also wonder if a lot of what this is about is we're just in a political moment where, we're 5 years past the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter, where, the thing was like defund the police. And, the tide has really turned, I think, in this country in terms of, what people expect from police and policing. So I also wonder if like part of what this is really about the politics of the day, and also, recognizing that yes, the police do actually have needs. I mean, the cars they drive around in are, they're pretty bad. I mean, let's be honest, they're driving around in old Crown Victorias. So I just, again, it's not really necessarily my perspective, but I'm just wondering about kind of, politically what is going on. And I also wonder, because I think the other thing too is if I thought that there was going to be a serious attempt to like have a housing bond or some other initiative next year or the following year that was really addressing housing in particular with a lot of money, and this was kind of part of the thing that needed to happen to get there, I'd be more like, okay, that makes sense. There's a give and take and whatnot. But like, I think the thing that hasn't sat well with me is, and again, I don't know if this is just the nature of commissions like this or what, but I do think that, we've been relatively vocal about the need for a housing bond or some other source of funding to deal with the housing crisis that we have. And it doesn't sound like there's any movement or, political energy to do that. So, for me, I'm kind of like, well, public safety, I mean, I get it, but like, what about housing? I guess is like y'all were saying. So, I can really see both sides of it, or a lot of different sides. So yeah, that's kind of what my thinking is at this point.
Jay, to your point about policing, I don't disagree with you, and I don't think police are bad, but I think given that, we've had some sweeping of camps recently, and what's the point of sweeping a camp if there's nowhere for these folks to go? And I get that not all of them want housing. Like I understand the dynamics of homelessness really well. But a lot of it is we don't have the right kind of housing. We don't have family housing. We don't have housing that allows your pet. We don't have the right kinds of housing and enough housing. And I think sometimes people who work in the field with folks experiencing homelessness hear police and think, oh, great, we'll just keep clearing out parks for them to go to the next park and then come back to the same park they were at. And, you know, the solution to homelessness is housing. And so I think that's where it pinched a nerve with me. You're right. I want the police to come to my house, you know, if I'm a victim of a crime or a car accident, or, you know, I need medical attention. I want all those things, and I will pay for those things, but it's not just those things. And not everybody who gets into law enforcement has a soft place for people experiencing homelessness. They sometimes cause a lot of problems in our city, right? And they don't always follow the law. And there's so many multiple reasons for that also include, like, what about our mental health system? Are we talking about that? Are we funding that in any way, shape, or form? Because that's another critical component of getting folks housed, you know, substance abuse treatment that's available when someone says, I'm ready, you know, not why we don't have a bed for you, you need to wait a month, and then they disappear, right? So I think it's like all of those things. So when I hear policing, I just worry about, like, what does that look like? So it's not that I'm against it. I agree with everything you said, but when we have a huge housing problem, and we do, that isn't getting better, the only way to solve that is to provide more money, and nonprofits can't do it themselves, you know, like the nonprofits serving people experiencing homelessness are applying for every dollar that's out there, and it's
Yep.
just not enough. So we need the municipalities' help.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine signing up to be a police officer and then being faced with all of the other things that are not actual policing, right? Like dealing with homeless folks all the time who are just really suffering. And, you know, it's like, I'm sure you understand very quickly as a police officer, you know, you put a homeless person in jail, it's a revolving door. Same with drugs. I'm sure that gets incredibly frustrating. And now, you know, more and more having to be like mental health counselors on top of it. I just am like, I don't know how they do it, honestly. I mean, I just have so much respect for police officers because of what they're being asked to do. And I just feel like sometimes we miss, and I think kind of to your point, Lori, it's like maybe we would support police more by building housing than by, you know, whatever else we're talking about. You know, if we got, you know, 80% of the folks on the streets off the streets, I mean, how many more police would you need, right? Or, you know, mental health assistance, or, you know, all the other things you mentioned. So, you know, I think we often like want a quick fix to a lot of these issues and think, well, you know, we'll throw some more police at it, but, you know, it doesn't really solve the problem. We're working on number 5, which is our work plan on the agenda. We've had a good discussion so far. Is there anything else, if you guys, if you have the agenda up in front of you, you know, they're just kind of some random stuff, but I think we've talked about a lot of this stuff. I think it sets us up well for engaging with the facilitators and, you know, thinking about what issues we probably want to bring to the table to kind of put in the bucket to choose from. I also know, Lori, you've got a drop off here in a few minutes. So once you do, we will lose quorum. So I just kind of want to do a quick check. I don't think there's a whole lot else. You know, the rest of the agenda will just take a few minutes to get through. But I just want to do a quick check. Is there anything else that y'all think that we need to talk about under number 5, our work plan? And or not that we're at number 6 yet, which is action items, which I think we're kind of covering as well, but are there any action items as well? So I guess before we move on from 5, are there any kind of last words or comments?
I guess since you mentioned it, yeah, a follow-up on the, you know, city county like housing bond. I think the attention's kind of moved to the ballot initiative.
Mhm.
But to your point, you know, I thought we had left it with one of the other subcommittees. And maybe if there's another update that we could be reminded.
Great. Anything else from you, Laurie? Are you good? Okay. Moving on to number 6, action items for our subcommittee. Thinking about our meeting next month, is there anything that you would like to see us cover next month? I mean, obviously we've got time to put an agenda together, but any action items that we haven't discussed? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay, moving on to number 7, action items for CEHD. I think that's basically what we've been talking about. So I've taken kind of the notes as best I can, and we'll share this with the full commission, and we'll do my best also as we kind of hopefully kind of move into the new kind of structure that I've been talking about. We'll bring a lot of this stuff up, but definitely as we think about what we do for 2025, please do help me in representing this subcommittee in terms of the things that we want to potentially talk about and deal with as the full commission. Any other action items that y'all can think of for CEHD? Anything in particular that we haven't talked about that you'd like for me to bring up or for us to address as a group? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, and that we can move on to number 8. Agenda item number 8, call to the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development's Equitable Housing Strategy Subcommittee. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Is there anybody in the audience? And if there is there anybody who wishes to speak?
Jay, there are 3 attendees. No one has raised their hand yet. Brenda, Christy, Taylor. No, nothing. No one.
Okay. I am then going to move on to agenda item number 9, next steps. Our next meeting, Equitable Housing Strategies, is January 21st at 1 p.m. The next full commission is scheduled for January 2nd at 4 p.m., but we are looking at moving that. It is, obviously right after the holiday. A couple of people have mentioned that they're not going to be available. I guess, Lori, you'll be off. Kenny, will you be off of work as well? I think we'll basically not be working. I know Jim is not going to be here. So we will be passing around, I think maybe a doodle poll or kind of seeing when, I think we're looking at the following week. So keep a lookout for that. Let's see. We talked about a draft agenda. I'll put something together for our next meeting. And I've got notes for to report out to the full commission. Anything else under next steps, y'all? If not, we can move to adjourn. Okay, hearing none. Yes, Neto?
No, nothing. I was just going to say goodbye.
Hey, we haven't adjourned yet. Give me-
I know. You called on me too soon.
Okay, thanks everybody for your time today. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday, and we are adjourned.
Good
Bye,
to see
everybody.
you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.